for CouchFighter.co, and in this installment I would like to talk about the epic main event that took place at UFC 139 between Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua. This fight will go down as one of the greatest fights of all time. At this fight, I mean, Dana White, after in the presser, said that it was one of the top 3 fights of all time, and he couldn't be more right. I think it would be we could go as far to say that it is one of the best fights of all time. In this fight, on a card that was completely stacked with 6 former champions, no title fights, just top contender fights, this fight was just, it capped off already what was a great, epic night for MMA. This fight between Dan Henderson, like I said, could be the best fight of all time. 2 Pride legends, 2 champions in different promotions, in Strikeforce, in Pride, and you know, it was such an epic fight between 2 warriors for 5 rounds in a non-title fight for a main event. Now, just to go down and just break down the fight. First off, did Dan Henderson win the fight? I believe so. Okay, if you're going down, I'd say that the 3rd round was the most controversial round. Not even controversial. Could have gone to a draw. It could have, based on the cards. 1st and 2nd round go to Henderson. 4 and 5 definitely go to Rua. And round 3 could go either way. Could have been a draw, most likely. But, you know, I'm not complaining about Dan Henderson being the winner. I wouldn't have complained about Shogun being the winner either. It could have gone either way. But I think based on damage alone, I know Dan Henderson doesn't get cut very easily, and you know, Shogun bleeds, gets cut quite a lot. You know, I'd say damage alone, you know, Dan Henderson won, but you know, Shogun put his damage on as well. So, one of the best fights of all time. Let's just go down what exactly happened. You know, these 2 proved why, you know, why they are such well-respected fighters in MMA, and a lot of young fighters, and almost any other MMA fighter, UFC fighter, could take notes from this fight. When you're on the main event, you're out there to put on a show. Okay, it's not there just to win. It's do or die. And that's what Shogun and Dan Henderson's fighting last night in all 5 of those rounds embodied. It doesn't matter if someone was gassed or not. They gave everything that they had until the final bell. There was no doubting that at all. And hats off and respect to both of them. So, what we saw in last night's fight, we saw Dan Henderson's great power. He knocked down Shogun Rua over 2 times with his deadly overhand right and his great underrated boxing, really. And you know, Shogun Rua showed us all what a dynamic fighter is with these leg kicks and his lefts, his rights, his Muay Thai. You know, he was great in the clinch. You know, he was able to put Henderson on the cage, and he was able to dictate the pace for a good amount of the fight. And really, I think the best part just of this entire fight is how it was so back and forth. You know, nothing was one-sided in this fight. You know, there were rounds that could have been one-sided, but it was so back and forth. If it was a 3-round fight, it would have no doubt been Dan Henderson. Rounds 4 and 5, Shogun Rua came out, showed heart, showed why he is a Pride legend, why he's a UFC legend, why he's one of the most respected fighters in all of MMA. Comes out and wins rounds 4 and 5. With great grappling, great ground and pound, good stand-up, and one of the most underrated and best things that any fighter could have is heart. And that's what Shogun Rua's fighting style embodied. And in those rounds as well, Dan Henderson didn't just lay back. The guy may have been gassed, but Dan Henderson fought with a lot of heart as well. All the way until the final bell, he was, what? Shogun had to get full mount about 4 or 5 times in the last round. Dan Henderson fought his way out of it and got the half guard, even though Shogun kept advancing into it. Henderson kept fighting to get out of it. He fought off submissions. And, you know, Shogun kept fighting till the final bell, till the final seconds ticked off the clock. He was working to get full mount and trying to work a finish. That's what MMA is. That's the old school fighting style. I mean, I'm not saying the fights aren't like that these days, but we rarely see fights like this. If this fight was on UFC on Fox, this is a fight that new MMA fans need to see. Okay, I'm not saying Velasquez and Dos Santos was a bad fight. It ended early. It was a knockout. That's what new fans like to see. But if you want to see an all-out war between 2 legends and 2 warriors of the sport, Shogun versus Henderson was most definitely that. These are fights that get people into MMA. Back and forth battles. Just when you think somebody is out, they're right back at you. What was it, in the 3rd or 4th round? You know, Henderson could barely stand. He was gassed. Shogun's pressing, and he's pressing, Henderson could barely stand. He comes right back with a right and knocks Shogun, cleans him, clean shot to the head. It was so back and forth. Shogun gets Henderson down to the ground. Henderson reverses it, tries to get a choke in on Shogun. It was just everything. Everything that MMA stands for. Mixed martial arts. It wasn't just a stand-up battle. It wasn't just a grappling battle. It was everything. That's why this was one of the greatest fights of all time. There was no quit. There was everything that you could possibly imagine. These two guys put on a show for the fans at UFC 139. And they're proving a case of why this is the fastest growing sport in the world. I mean, watching this fight, I was going crazy, but at the same time, I was sitting back and taking this fight in. Like, wow, we rarely get to witness things like this. Epic battles. You don't get to witness these all the time. Sometimes fights are so one-sided and they're fun to watch, but a fight that is so back and forth is just absolutely epic. And this one will go down in the record books. This is a fight that MMA fans and UFC fans will be talking about 20 years from now when this sport is one of the biggest sports in the world, if that ever happens. So I think a few things in regards to this. There's a couple other things, besides it being such a great fight. In regards to Shogun Rua, we've always questioned, you know what, I won't doubt, I've always thought Shogun's a great fighter. His shirt, one of his walkout shirts was one of the first ones I ever bought as an MMA fan. But Shogun Rua, we always question him coming out and whether he's in the best shape, whether he's what Shogun we're going to see. And, you know, we do question it sometimes. But you know one thing, I realized this last night, one thing we can never doubt about Shogun Rua is he always fights to the best of his ability. He always fights with a lot of heart. He's always fighting for the finish. That is a warrior. Doesn't matter win or lose. It's all about what he puts into that fight. And he always, no matter what condition he is in, he gives it his all. His fights with Machida, even the fight he lost with Griffin, he may have not been in the best condition. His first one with Griffin, he still brought it to 3 rounds, and he made it a war. Even though it was one side, he always gives you his best. He never lays back. There is no quit in Shogun Rua. And that's why fighters should take notes from these fights. There is no quit. Not when someone sinks in a choke, you tap 2 seconds later. You go until you cannot go any farther. There's no quit in Shogun Rua. The guy is a warrior. The guy will go down the record books. This is epic stuff. And, you know, hats off to Shogun Rua. He will land on his feet, and we might see him back in title picture down the road. And I hope for nothing for the best from him. And with the same thing, you know, with Dan Henderson. You know, this whole thing, he's fighting in Strikeforce. The talent level isn't that great. And, you know, maybe that's the case in Strikeforce. But, you know, a lot of guys have come over from Strikeforce and showing us that, you know, it wasn't just garbage cans, quote unquote, that they were fighting. Dan Henderson may have been gassed in 4 and 5, but he still gave us everything he had. He gave us every last drop of gas or fuel that was in that tank, all the way until round 5. It's not like he just laid back and took. He may have taken his beating, but he didn't just lay back and quit. He fought out of those ground and pound attempts all the way till the 5th round. In the 3rd round, when he could barely stand, he was still giving Shogun his rights and his lefts back at him. He did not just lay back. And, you know, Dan Henderson wins this fight. He moves on, fights the winner of Machida and Jones. And you know what? He may not have the gas, but Dan Henderson gives you fireworks in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd round. He gives you everything that he has. And this is just why it was such a rare and epic matchup for Shogun and Henderson. Because you know what? Even though Shogun is more dynamic, these two both bring the same thing to the table. They both bring the same thing to the table. It is do or die when you go into the octagon, whether it's 3 rounds, whether it's 5 rounds. The fight could always end at any minute, but that was not the case last night. I mean, even though Shogun was rocked in the 3rd, you know, it showed a lot of resolve and heart for him to get out of that. These two guys, they were pretty much the same. They're both warriors, both guys that do not quit and lay back and just accept the beating. They take it, they reverse it. There's 100% resolve, 100% heart, and there is no quit. That's why this will go down as one of the greatest fights ever. If you haven't seen it, you have to go back and watch it. If not, and you did see it, you witnessed something that was it wrote the record books. It will go down in history. So Shogun Rua will land on his feet. Dan Henderson gets a title shot with this fight. I mean, it hasn't been announced yet, but he will get a title shot, hopefully. And you know what? He has maybe slim to none based on his cardio and his age. But you know what? Dan Henderson is aged well. Okay, his striking has only gotten better. He's a very smart fighter. He may go out reckless, but you know what? His chin and everything else, not to mention, just based on last night, these two guys' chins are ridiculous. They both traded back and forth. And, you know, they're like I said, there was no quit. These two proved what two warriors are like when they enter the octagon. Great chins. They will give you everything that they have. So, an epic fight in the light heavyweight division, a successful night for the UFC and the sport of MMA itself. And you know what? It shows you, though. Here's the one thing that I will say. Sometimes it's not all about the KOs, the submissions, the early fights that finish, or the fights that finish early. It all comes down to the epic battles and the wars. Those are the fights that will be remembered the most. People say that Velasquez and Dos Santos' fight was great. Yeah, it was a great knockout. But people will be talking 20 years, 30 years down the road and say, man, do you remember that Shogun and Henderson fight? I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. Hats off to both guys. No quit. What a fight. I mean, I can't believe how far the sport's come. These are the fights that people remember, not the KOs and the submissions. You know, they're great, they're entertaining, but what it comes down to is it's not just about the finishes. It's about more than that. It's about everything that goes into the fight. It's about not quitting. It's about showing your heart. And it's about fighting like a warrior. That's what these guys are. They're the modern day warriors of our generation. The guys that will sacrifice everything once the cage door is closed, and they're going to put on a show. No quit at all. That's what it comes down to. And Henderson and Shogun will forever, I mean, even before this, have my respect. They will forever have the respect of the MMA community for what they did. Thank you, Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua, for putting on one of the most epic performances of all time, going into another exciting year in MMA and UFC. There's only better fights to come. This set the tone. November was a very exciting month for MMA, and you know, I can't even wait for what the year of 2012 holds and the remaining year of 2011 holds for MMA. So, if you haven't seen it, go out and watch it. If you did, you were completely treated to what MMA embodies. Everything. Every single mixed martial art, ground, stand-up, everything you can possibly imagine. So that's what I have for this edition of the CageSide Couch. This is Kyle Delaney signing off from the CageSide Couch.